Hi, so I've been asked a couple of times about open-mindedness, particularly where does it come from and how do you get it? Now, apparently I'm open-minded. I didn't really think of myself as being open-minded, but apparently I am. And I've been asked by quite a lot of people, how is it that you're open-minded? So I thought I'd talk a little bit about it, particularly as I've just done that video on perpetual motion. And perpetual motion is one of those concepts that seems to polarize people quite strongly in one camp or the other camp, so it seemed appropriate to talk about open-mindedness at this point. Now it is raining today and it's likely to rain all day long, and I'm in the lab, so you're going to have background noise of the rain, for which I apologise, but I'm just going to talk over it. So there's quite a few things to say, really, because I'm a bit really of a behaviourist. I think that your behaviour comes from your environment and your learning, really, rather than genetics. I don't really subscribe to the idea that intelligence is in the genes. I think it's really the environment that is responsible. Argue that if you like, it's just a view I have and it's one I subscribe to. The other thing is I'm going to refer back to the video on perpetual motion, because there are some good exemplars in there of what I consider to be open-mindedness, and obviously the reverse of that. So a bit about me. I always find it a bit weird to talk about me, really, because it's just a bit personal, so it's a bit weird. But I'm going to talk about it anyway, because I don't think that you can understand where somebody's coming from unless you have a bit of their history, really. So I'm from a family of four kids, actually 6 of us in total. My father was Irish and he worked in a tractor factory until he came over to England and married my mother and was a building labourer most of his life. Now, my family was actually pretty poor, and I did tell somebody this story once and they just claimed I was lying, but it's the truth. And it's the childhood that I led. Now, I hated school when I was a kid. I did absolutely nothing at school. In fact, I was a bit of a naughty boy, actually, by which I mean I was a thief. I would shoplift and steal cars and break into houses and those kind of things, and of course got into trouble for that. Been to court a few times and that sort of thing. So quite a naughty boy for quite a long time. But for some reason, and this is really what I consider a turning point in my life, and I've got no idea what the reason is, but for some reason my father decided that he'd had enough of labouring and he would get himself a degree. And he decided to. Once he went into education, it helped the rest of the family realise that being educated was a way out of the kind of poverty we were living in. Now, our poverty, which we're going back about 50 years here, was fairly stark, and the kind of poverty you wouldn't expect to meet in Western Europe, and probably not in these days, but it's certainly what we went through. The worst place we lived in was in fact just 2 rooms. We rented 2 rooms in the corner of the town, and we didn't have a bathroom. We had to use the public toilets, and we used to bath in a tin bath in a yard, and we shared that yard with a local taxi company. So we didn't have a particularly good childhood. I have very clear memories of living on nothing but potatoes and custard, of all things, for a number of weeks at one time, and I guess that would be a time when my father was unemployed and trying to make ends meet. We used to get our shoes from the social services by getting a ticket and going down to queue for second-hand shoes and all that kind of thing we actually lived through. So we had some quite stark and depressing and harsh poverty. And of course, those kind of conditions lead you to do some very strange things. At one stage, we actually lived near a catering college, and the catering college would throw away the food that they'd been preparing for their classes, and we would raid the bins for the catering college food. And that might seem odd to people, but it's an experience that I had, and it illustrates the kind of grinding poverty that we lived in for a large number of years. But as I say, for some reason, and probably to do with that, my father decided to get himself a degree, and after he got himself a degree, he got himself what we call a good job. So it was an illustration to us, I think, that education was a way forward. So when I turned about 15, I suddenly got interested in school and started to study. Now, I made dramatic improvement, so from being an absolute failure, I actually managed to get a few O-levels when I left school, and it wasn't many, it was the minimum you could get. I got 5, as it happens. And then I went to college. College was a great thing for me. I loved college because it kind of fitted in with this, hey, my life is changing kind of view. And everybody was very different in college than when they had been at school. You didn't have the same people there. I went to a very small college, actually. I went to Greenhead College in Huddersfield. And when I went there were only about 200 students. It was quite a tiny campus, and I left there with 3 A-levels, which I was very pleased with, and went on to a degree. I went to Newcastle, as it happens. Now, that step through things, as I say, was really brought about by my father's change of heart, and that illustration of it's through study, through work, that you actually can improve your life. And I suppose that's been something that I've looked at really, and been quite a large part of how it is that I see things. Instead of getting depressed about things, I don't look at it that way. I look at it as being, what can I do to improve it? And that's really inculcated from that very early age. Now, my mother was a strange woman who ended up actually in a mental hospital, and it was about then when my father divorced her, and she was quite brutal, actually. She would be fairly savage with us all, and I have been in hospital a couple of times, courtesy of my treatment at my mother's hands. And there's 2 ways that can drive you. It can either drive you down that path of despair when you give up on things and you think that everybody owes you something and life's problems are too great, or it can do something else. And I think in my terms it does something else, and that is the realization that your life is in your control and it's up to you to do something about it. It's not other people who will do anything for you. It's that confusion we have between human rights and civil rights and concurrent responsibilities. We think for some reason that our civil rights are our human rights and that we are due a whole lot of things courtesy of this, but then we don't take on the civil responsibilities that are concurrent with those civil rights. I don't really subscribe to that view. I don't think the world owes you anything at all. I think you have some human rights because we live in a human society, but the world owes you absolutely nothing. So if you want something from the world, really, it's up to you, and your life is in your control. Now, I don't know why that happened, but from that treatment I adopted that view that my life is in my control. And couple that with this sudden realization of education was the way out of poverty and the way to progress and improve my life, you can see quite clearly there that what I'm bound to do is put the work in needed in order to advance. And that's what I did, I think. Okay, that's not actually quite what I mean, because there are plenty of things in your life that are not in your control. What I actually mean is that your view of your life is what's in your control, how you choose to see it. You can either choose to see it as, oh, boo-hoo, everything's so tough, I can't possibly do anything, or you can choose to see it, yes, that's tough, but I can try to do something, or at least I can have a good view of it. So those 2 factors, I think, are what drive me forward. Now, I have a notion that there are traumas in life. There's the so-called birth trauma, then there's the death trauma that you get, and I think there's another trauma that we get when we realise we're not the centre of the world. And that's really quite hard for people to cope with, because for a long period of your life, obviously, you are the centre of the world. You get born, your parents dote on you, you go to school and you realise there are other kids, but you still feel that centre of the worldness, and that happens to lots of people through actually a large part of their life. And this is one of the things that I think teenagers go through. They begin to realise they're not the centre of the world, and to be honest, they're pretty pissed about it, because all that time they've spent thinking they are, and suddenly find out that they're not, that there are other people in the world too who have, unfortunately, different views than they do, and it's hard to cope with. So learning you're not the centre of the world is something that happens quite slowly. It's fairly traumatic, and some people actually never get over that trauma. They would always want to be the centre of the world, but unfortunately, of course, you're not. Now, I think my early experiences taught me quite early on that I'm not the centre of the world, that there are other people out there that have different views than I have, and I have to listen to them. I don't want to. I'd just rather tell everybody my views and everybody say, hey, you're right. But they don't. They tell me I'm wrong. It's madness. But they do. And this brings us actually to a good example on the perpetual motion video. People's views are very sacred to them on the whole. And that's okay. But when you listen to people's views, the one thing you have to do if you disagree with them, according to me, is to disagree with them politely. And if they can't have a meeting of minds, well, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing to say that your view is the correct view. It's just a view. And you can't be that precious about it. You've got to give people space to be people. So we've got those three things now coming in there into what could be considered open-mindedness. So those three things are, you're not the centre of the world, you are your own responsibility, you can only control yourself, you can't control other people. Now, I'm one of those people who believes that you can only know something if you do something. So my early experiences in life were pretty harsh, but it did allow me to learn those three principles by doing them, really, and that's been an advantage to a degree. And it really brings us rather neatly onto this perpetual motion video, which is a good example of doing open-mindedness. So we talked about how do you get to be open-minded, what are the principles of being open-minded, again according to me, and now we're going to look at an exemplar of putting that open-mindedness into practice. Now, when you post a video on something like perpetual motion, two things will happen. People will either look at the title and think, what nonsense, I'm not wasting my time on that, good luck to them, and people will watch it. Well, people watch it, some will comment, and the comments fall into three main camps. You get those people who believe it, and they will support it and look for the proof of it, whatever you happen to do. Then you get those people who disbelieve it, those people who will tell you it's rubbish, whatever you say and whatever you do, there must be some trick involved. And then you get those people that I think are open-minded, those people who will look at it and ask themselves if it can be true or not. Now, I don't know if it's going to be true or not. I have my own particular views of it, which I'm not going to expound, but I certainly don't know. But there's one person, and I'm going to mention her by name. There are other people who have commented, but this particular person is always worth a read through. Now, if she's a bit embarrassed or upset about me mentioning her, then I do apologise directly, but this is Kimberly Peacock. Now, I have to admit, I have a bit of an intellectual crush on Kimberly Peacock, because to my mind, she's a genius. When you read through her comments, you can pick up such interesting things from it. I mean, I can't claim to understand half of what she says, but the stuff she says is always worth a read and a think about. And if you read through her comments, and her initial view of it was, what's going on? And some of the comments she's made have been tremendously interesting and tremendously helpful, and that's what I mean. You don't either believe or disbelieve something, you have a think about what's going on. And when you have a think about what's going on and you look into it a little bit, then whether it's true or not becomes insignificant, because the startling things that come out of that are really what are worth investigating. Now, Kimberly's idea was that the magnets and the string formed a system, and she really started off a whole train of thought for me with that particular view that I think is extraordinarily interesting, and that's what it is to be open-minded. Kimberly is open-minded. It's not open-minded to say, yes, it works because ABC, or no, it doesn't work because ABC. That's not open-mindedness. Open-mindedness is, I don't care if it does or doesn't work, what's happening in the system, and is it interesting and valuable if we look at this? That kind of thing is open-mindedness in practice. Now, I need to go to a little aside here, because it's one of those concepts that polarizes people so much, and people love their ideas and find it very hard to let them go, or find it very frustrating when they're arguing about them, that it's quite difficult to keep civil. And it's really important to keep civil, because remember one of those tenets I was talking about. You're not the only person in the world. Other people exist, and they have an impact, and they have a right to be being civil to. That took a bit of getting out, didn't it? So let's see if we can put that another way. You're not the centre. Nobody is the centre. You have your set of ideas, and they're good. Other people have their own set, and they're just as good as yours. They don't agree with you. Tough. Don't get upset about it. Move on. If they don't agree and you don't agree, then okay, learn to disagree politely. But you have to keep it civil, particularly on here, because I encourage keeping things civil. There you go. What I think open-mindedness is, and where I think my open-mindedness came from, and how I think you ought to put open-mindedness into practice. I hope it was of interest to you, and thank you very much for watching.